I have these notes, but I don't know if I'll use them. Because, as I said to you last week, I wanted to talk to you about the 5 principles of unity. And they are so integral to what all of that I teach that there's just way too much to talk about in one 20-minute talk. And then that song, I can't even get all the words in that I just heard, but they're exactly what I'm trying to say. It is so bold for those of us who grew up in a traditional religion to say the words that unity teaches. It is so bold. That last line, I am God. What? How dare you say that? How dare we say that? But that's the daringness that we invite ourselves to think, even if we can't wrap our heads around it. The 2 principles that I want to talk about today of Unity's 5, if you missed last week, I don't want to spend the whole time on the introduction again, but I have gotten an idea that a lot of you would love to hear, just some of the basics about Unity's principles. And these principles were not written 110 years ago when Unity started. They were only written 20 some years ago. When we jump that millennium, I just get all mixed up with my subtraction. By Connie Fillmore Bazzi, who is the great-granddaughter of the Fillmores who founded Unity. And she took all the stuff she had learned from the early classic Unity writings and what she learned in her seminary time in the 70s. She was a student at Unity Institute at the same time Chad was. And she took in the 90s and wrote this little article for the Daily Word that summarized Unity's basic teachings into 5. And that was quite a feat in itself because Charles Fillmore wasn't very systematic in what he taught. He just jumped all over the place, and she just tried to pick up things. So she has 5 principles that she's written, and books have been written about those since the 1990s, one of which is this one, The 5 Principles by Ellen Davenport, who is a Unity minister, and I talked about that last week. Also, they are mentioned by Eric Butterworth, but he wrote before those 5 were written, the condensed version. So they are the basis of what Unity teaches. And today I want to talk about the first 2, which is really theology. The first 2, which we had a handout last week, but I have a slide for the first one. I want to just say to it, there is only one ultimate power in the universe, and that power is God, and its nature is absolute, unchanging good. Now, some of us have pictures when the word God comes up. And Wendy Craig Purcell tells a story. She's another Unity minister. She wrote, Ask Yourself This. She tells a story when she gets on the airplane, and boy, I just flew this week, so I know that feeling. You know, when you sit down in the airplane, you kind of just would rather, I should say, would kind of just rather be alone in the airplane and rather than talk to somebody I don't know for 2 hours on the plane. Well, Wendy says she travels a lot, and there are times where she would rather just be quiet and alone and hopes the person doesn't strike up a conversation. Because, you know, one of the first questions they ask is, after where are you going, or are you going home, is what do you do? And she says, I almost dread the question because if I say I'm a minister, I get all kinds of answers. You know, like they quickly look out the window and hope this person will just go away. Or they start in on their faith, and then she has to carry out a conversation that she doesn't know if she should be frank with the person of what she thinks or just let that person think what they think. Or another person will say, and she describes this, another person will say, well, I don't believe in God. And so she describes in this story, I don't believe in God. To that comment, I say, tell me about the God you don't believe in. I love it, don't you? Remember that one. And this is what she writes. I listen intently without comment. Invariably, the God they describe is a being residing in physical space and time, often looking like Michelangelo's God of the Sistine Chapel. He metes out judgment, grants some wishes, but not others, and rewards those who believe in him with everlasting salvation and punishes those who don't with everlasting suffering. I simply smile and say, I don't believe in that God either. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I don't believe in that God either. She says, my answer inevitably opens up a lively conversation in which we usually find some common ground as we begin to talk about an ultimate reality, a higher presence, or an innate wisdom and intelligence operative in the universe. That is the God of that I believe in, and that's what Unity teaches. It's kind of like a God for grown-ups. So we had a childhood God like Santa Claus. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good, so be good, for goodness sake. A Santa Claus or a Superman. Oh, God, please fix this. Like a beam of light is coming out of the sky and is going to fix something for you or rescue you. A God that is a person rather than what I like to think of as a presence. A God that we think of the old God, the Old Testament God. That's a childlike idea of God too, one that saves your team but makes sure the other team loses. The Israelites had a more serious thing about teams than we do with like football. There was a little blood involved. So, a lot of people have just let go of that. How can we have a God that saves the Israelites but drowns all the Egyptians? Or saves the Israelite children but kills all the babies that were born to Egyptians? We don't like that. We don't want to have that childish picture of God anymore. It can make some of us just so sick. Our stomachs are tight. And so we've run away from that picture of God and closed out any other possibility. Some of us have found God again through something like 12 steps, where we were able to call it a higher power. And then, okay, a higher power. So in 12 steps, when you're thinking, I'm just sinking under this addiction, I can't take care of it myself anymore, so you call upon a higher power. There's no physical description to that. There's no place for that higher power. It's a presence, and it's a power that you can look to for your strength. That's God, whatever name you give it. And some of us don't even like to use the word God because of the old embedded theology. So when I say God, I have to translate myself, and sometimes I just don't. My mother, who taught me a pretty traditional religion, heard me toward the end of her life as I got bolder and bolder about speaking unity beliefs. She died just before I went into seminary. And I was getting bolder and bolder as I got to know it well enough to speak it. I wouldn't say God anymore, I'd say the divine. And she stopped me and she said, Mom, Pat, why don't you say God? And I said, I just can't. She was heartbroken. And yet I had to explain. But the divine is the same. It's just a bigger picture for me. It's an unlimited picture. And the word God for me was limited to that childhood picture. So we can use any word. And the words that other cultures use are great too. the Atman, the Hindus use, the God essence that is in us and all around us. So the teaching, the first teaching of Unity talks about this ultimate power in the universe, and it also mentions that it's unchangeable and essentially good. And that can be a hang-up for some people too. How can God be good? What about all the other powers? They're not so good. There's some evil in this world. How do we deal with that? It's a yeah, but kind of thing. And I invite you to stay after for the second hour when we discuss this principle, because we'll explore what about evil a little more. The teaching that Emma Curtis Hopkins gives us about this is something that sounds like A Course in Miracles, if you study that. She says, God is the only substance there is in the universe, and God is spirit. And remember, spirit is a word that comes from the Latin spiritus, breath. Okay, it's not a substance, it's not a form, it's just breath. And then spirit is all there is anywhere. And whatever is not spirit is nowhere. It has no real existence. It's just a figment of what is but a false claim to be something. A false way of thinking, trying to establish its way as true. It's as if a shadow tried to prove itself into something substantial. As if a shadow tried to prove itself into something substantial. That's a hairy thing when you think about evil. How can evil just be an illusion? And there's no way that we can answer this in a 20-minute talk on a Sunday morning. It's something for us to work through, think through, explore, play with, and question. Well, how can evil be an illusion when we see its effects? So I invite you to ponder that. The thing is, we talked about God being principle. And principle is like gravity. Remember I said that last week? Or you can think electricity. It works for everybody, whether they even understand that it works or not. No one can opt out of gravity unless they leave this planet. Even the astronauts on the moon had some gravity to depend on. Gravity. It works for everyone. Jesus used the sun as an example of God because he said the sun shines on the good and the bad guys. The rain falls on all of us. These givens, like sun and gravity, work for all of us. That's what God is. God, the ultimate power of the universe. We can block it out, the sun. We can block the sun out by closing the shades or closing the door or building a barrier to make shade. But it's still there. If you open the door or raise the shades, the sun comes back through. It's up to us to open the door to allow the sun through. And that's the same as this ultimate power of the universe, God. It's there. We can block it out. We can pretend it's not there. We can build some barriers so that we don't have any awareness of it. But it still works with us and for us. It's principle. It's universal law. And so the law of the universe is something for us to learn about so that we can use it and use it to our joy, to our best productivity. The second principle has to come after we realize the first one. If God, the divine, is all that is and is everywhere present, then how could we not be God? So the second principle, human beings were created from absolute good. That's God. And so our inherent nature is also good. That's God. We call the inherent goodness of human beings the Christ. Now, that Christ consciousness is not unique to Unity, and you've heard it in other circles. The Christ consciousness is the consciousness that Jesus was able to demonstrate. He was an enlightened being, and Jesus got it. that he and the Father, was his word for God, are one. And the Father, the Son, is there for everyone. The Son, S-U-N, the sun shines on all. The Father is me. I am the Father. He was demonstrating the consciousness that he had. We call that the Christ consciousness. So Jesus' last name isn't Christ, any more than my last name is Christ. And some of the things we like to do is to think, can you say Pat the Christ? Can you say your name, the Christ? That's our ultimate goal, to be able to demonstrate the Christ consciousness. That's what all of us are doing if we engage in meditation. What are we trying to do? We're trying to quiet that little mind that is always putting ourselves down, limiting ourselves, telling ourselves you're not good enough, or you're not big enough, or you're not pretty enough, or you're not able enough. We're trying to quiet that little mind and trying to remember who we truly are. The true essence of us is God. We were made from God, and we can shine as God, just as the trees do, and the fish and the birds and every creature. They don't spend any time telling themselves they're not good enough. We can learn a lesson from that. The acorn has the pure potential of the oak tree. The acorn is the essence of the oak. It's a good metaphor for who you are, and every one of you. You have that essence of God. Allow it to grow. Allow it to grow. When you hear yourself saying limiting things about yourself, or comparing yourself to someone else, or putting someone else down because it makes you feel better, remember that's not the essence of God speaking out. The essence of God is there's unlimited potential. It's pure potentiality. Have you heard Deepak Chopra say that in his wonderful accent? Pure potentiality. I love it. That's God. And so when you are calling on a higher power to help you over an addiction, it's pure potentiality you're calling upon. And you're asking yourself, do I need to think of myself as so limited that I can't overpower this addiction? Think about whatever addiction it was. You don't have to think about it being alcohol or drugs. It can be shopping. It can be hoarding. It can be gossiping. They're all addictions. Can I look past that limited picture of myself and see that I'm actually, at the very depths of my being, pure potentiality? That's what it means to think of yourself as the Christ. And one of the words that comes to me just makes me pause every time I read it. It comes out of, well, several things, but Butterworth says it makes me stop. He says in the Discover the Power Within You, which is a powerful book, even though it's 60 years old. You are the presence of God at the point where you are. At the point where you are. You know, when I started thinking I am the presence of God, I was in a really low place when I first found Unity. I was depressed. I was miserable. I was wallowing in my misery, my self-made misery, actually, blaming everybody else, but it was really my own self-made depression. And I needed to hear that, but it was scary. I am the presence of God. And then he said, at the point where you are. So, okay, so what it is I've shut the door. I don't have any light shining on me. I'm in darkness. But if I open it just a tad, there's the presence of God. And that's the point that I'm at. And I can be gentle with myself and take it one tiny millimeter at a time to open that door. So, being gentle with ourselves and realizing we don't have to be Jesus the Christ yet. We need to be Pat the Christ. When can I shine the radiance that I really truly am? I can shine it when I forget and stop believing all the illusory things that I believe about myself. And you can too. Even if you could write a huge list of all the things you feel like you've done wrong in your life, and only a short list of the little good things, don't think of it as things. Think of it as your essence. As Paul Tillich says, the ground of your being is God. Let that light shine. As Jesus said, you are the light of the world. As miserable as you might feel, or as regretting as you might be about whatever has happened in your life, think of it. I am the light of the world? Well, and the next line is, so let your light so shine, so people can see the glory of God. They're not going to see the glory of God from any other place but from right here, from within. Let it shine out. And believe yourself when you say, I am the very essence of God. It is like, if you want to get it technical, if any of you want that, the theology of unity is not really theism, because that's the idea of God's out there. And it's not pantheism, as if God is everything or everything is God, like the rock is God and the tree is God. It's panentheism, which is God is in everything. It's like the ocean with waves. We are the waves. We're part of the ocean. A wave is part of the ocean. You can't take the wave out and hold it and say, this is the wave. You can't put it in a separate place. It loses its waveness when you try to take it out. It's part of the ocean, and yet it's a different part of the ocean. It's not the deep part. It's not that other wave. It's this wave. You are the wave in the ocean. And you will blend in, and you ebb and flow, and you're in that ocean, the ocean being God. You got that metaphor? Yeah. It's not like the fish in the ocean, because the fish is different than the water. It's the wave that's in the ocean. We are God, individualized as me, and you, and you, and you, and the baby, and the tree, and the goat. All of us are God. So be the God that you are. Be the best Christ you can be. That is our call. That is our call. To be the best Christ we can be by awakening to that truth that we are. And that's the truth that we want to live. So there's a lot to discuss here. And if you hear this, you'll hear this again and again and again in Unity teachings. We find different ways to say it. We can hear parables in the Bible that tell it. There are many ways to let it sink in. And so I invite you to let it sink in. Even if you feel like you just can't let it sink in. No, I can't go there. Be gentle with yourself and let it sink in. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God, the daughter of the living God. The essence of you is God. Let it shine. And join me the next hour so we can talk about this some more. All right? Namaste.